All right, and all right, and today we have our good friend Umu from Cisco, who's going to walk us through a topic on SASE. But before we get into there, we want to try and talk around, well, what it is exactly that we're doing and why the topic and the technology has come up. I think return to office mandates are something which is increasing day to day. Obviously, the focus has always been on sort of employee well-being, collaboration, and so forth. But I think we see a lot of stories around how people return to the office and they continue to have virtual meetings just from the office with each other, funnily enough. But look, I think something that we've noticed with all of this is that return to office mandates are also something where, companies looking to go more hybrid, right? Fred, what did you have in mind?
This is a very sore topic for a lot of people, including myself, to be honest, given that the flexible working arrangements that I've had thus far has given me a lot of advantages, to be honest. It's given me time with my family, being able to prepare my own meals even while I'm working from my own little setup at home. So this is quite a bit touchy for me too. But in my head, at least, I'd like to give our listeners a bit of a reassurance, or at least, in my opinion, is that hybrid working is here to stay. It's never going to be back to office 100%, even though we hear the Amazons and the Googles of the world forcing, or at least rumored to be telling their employees to, hey, come back to the office. It's a whole different topic in my head, but I would say that's probably more motivated by real estate prices more than anything else. What do you say?
Oh, mate, I'm right there with you. Yeah, I love a good risque take like that, so I appreciate that. And so, as part of all of this hybrid work thing, right? I know, like, we remember at the start of the pandemic, Corona things happened. IT people were scrambling. How the heck do I get people to connect securely from home to all of these remote assets? And VPNs kind of existed, but it's not always been the most friendliest of technologies, right? And so from all of that, and so from the pandemic, a lot of things were born, like, the uptake of WebEx, Zoom, other sort of meeting platforms, cloud, Office 365. I can take things anywhere. I can go work from home. In our last session with Scott from Thousand Eyes, we obviously discussed around reliable connectivity as well and the ability to, try and monitor someone's, connectivity to all of these different assets as well through the polling of, the assets from the endpoint and so forth, right? So today's topic is going to be a little bit more focused on security and I guess SASE and the platform and what SASE really is, right? I think SASE,
Yeah,
it's a big phrase, right? I think it
big.
means something different to a lot of different vendors too.
It's a big buzzword, to be honest. And speaking of remote working, our guest today, Umu, I, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been working with you on and off for the past year or so, and I do know for a fact that hybrid working and home working arrangement also works a great deal for you, right?
Absolutely. I'm totally pro hybrid work, and like you both nailed it, right? We've since the pandemic, we're now in that hybrid work, and even though people are mandated to go back to the office, I still believe that hybrid work is here to stay, and we've
Yes.
we've benefited from it. I've definitely benefited from it as well.
Awesome. So, Vlad, how about we kind of talk through that whole thing with, where we are in the world of working? What's your take on, what are the things that probably employers and companies nowadays should be taking into consideration? Well, at least we're not talking from the HR or maybe facilities point of view, but rather more on the IT side of things. We know as IT people that there are a lot of dependencies that we need to consider. to enable our employees or to enable our users for remote working or hybrid working or wherever it is that they want to work. How about you kind of talk us through that one?
Yeah, so I think if we go, let's take a step back 5 years and you think about what the traditional sort of network diagram of any business looked like, and you had your branches, you'd connect them via MPLS back to some headquarters or data center. Everything would go through a centralized firewall. There were very limited amounts of sort of use cases and people who would work remote. Maybe there would be a sales guy that goes out and has, traditional AnyConnect VPN access back to accessing some sort of service, but it wasn't common for every employee. And for IT people back then, it's really easy to apply security, right? In that everyone's going through a centralized firewall, bada bing, bada boom, I apply a policy there, and then that shuts down, the entire network for everyone to certain resources I don't want them to access. Now, suddenly, when you allow people to work from anywhere and everywhere, where you apply policy changes significantly. Yes, you still need to do it for the office on the office firewall, but now how do I apply that at sort of a endpoint level, the same policies, right? And I think that's where we've come into what the SASE play is. But SASE, SSE, there's all of these different terms that are thrown around. I guess it'd probably be a good start if we can, with you, Umu, try to understand like what are the different bits that typically make up a generalized SASE solution.
No, thanks, Vlad. I think that's a really good place to start on. Is yes, we hear the word SASE. It is an acronym, and then you hear SSE as well. They're both acronyms. Now, both of these acronyms, SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, and SSE, Secure Service Edge as well, without the access bit, were both terms that were coined by Gartner. So it wasn't a vendor or it wasn't an industry. It was this body that sort of kind of came up with these two terms. Now, SASE existed before SSE. SSE only came out about 2019 during the pandemic. Now, when you look at both of them or both of those two terms, Secure Access Service Edge, which is SASE, is a combination or convergence of your networking. So we've always had networking on this side, and then we've always had security on another side. And majority of the time when you look at organizations, especially large organizations, you'd have two different teams sort of looking at those two different aspects of the organization. You've got your network engineers, you've got your security engineers. When you look at a SASE capability, you're now looking at a convergence of these two. And when we look at the networking aspect of it, it is more focused on that SD-WAN capability, where we're bringing in together sites and branches together. And then when you look at the security side of things is, yes, you are protecting things on-prem, like you said, you've got this firewall, you've got this traditional, I'm going to call it traditional perimeter because that's how we've always known it. It's always been these four walls that we've always had and had the capability to actually control that because it was within our presence. And then you've got the SSE side of things, which is a term that was coined again by Gartner, but it only focuses on just security aspect side of things. So you're looking at different ways of securing users and endpoints as they work remotely. So when it started, it was only internet security. When I say internet security, it's more on the web filtering, content filtering, DNS, DLP, data loss prevention, cloud access security broker. So that's how SSE started, I would say. So there was that portion of SSE. Now, what Gartner did when we had COVID and now there was remote access that was required, it added additional capabilities to an SSE component of a particular or of any vendor. And the additional capability that was added was, yes, you're protecting users as they access the internet and that internet security component, but what are you doing in terms of remote users trying to access your applications that you host? And that's where we now have not new terms, but you're going to start hearing things like zero trust capabilities, so ZTNA. And you've also got, in some instances with different vendors, you got things like VPN as a service as well. So removing the VPN from the traditional on-premises that you have and taking that to the cloud.
So I've read somewhere, and you can confirm if this is true or not, but I've read somewhere that this whole SASE framework, well, I've heard of other people refer to it as SASE. They just want to be more accurate, but we're talking about the same thing. I've read somewhere that when Gartner came out with the whole SASE definition, it was this one big vague blob of technology that customers, or probably IT consumers, have no idea what to do with unless they really read into the fine prints of what that technology is about. And as you said, the concept of SSE came about around 2019, which is a few years after the whole SASE concept was coined, or term was coined. And what Gartner did was they made the definition a bit more clear, because they made the formula SASE is equal to SSE plus SD-WAN. So they essentially broke down the two major components, which is the infrastructure side and the security side, which is SSE, or Secure Services Edge. And then I distinctly remember learning this from you as you were mentioning this, that SSE were made of 5 kind of major pillars, which is, one of them was firewall as a service, VPN as a service, zero trust network access, and a few others. I don't remember the others, but is that kind of the more accurate view or vision of that definition?
I'd like to say yes. There was that split whereby it was, SASE, and like I said, SSE sort of converges both your networking and your security, and potentially could be, one vendor that is sort of providing you with this capability. SSE on the other side, look at it also from a point of view, maybe I don't have anything on premises as well, right? So I've got these security capabilities, and I can choose whoever I want to work with in terms of my networking, right? It doesn't have to be the same vendor who's giving me SSE. Sometimes you want them to be the same, but yeah, you can sort of choose who do I go with for security capabilities, and who do I go for with my networking capabilities. That's why I say you got organizations whereby the networking team and the security team work together, but they don't necessarily manage the same thing, right? So you sort of kind of split them between the two.
Fantastic. So I was just thinking earlier, as you were mentioning all of these different services that sort of make up, part of SSE, there was like obviously the traditional VPN. And I mean, this still does exist. It has its purposes, I think we all know. You mentioned VPN as a service, and I'm guessing this is just offloading the VPN service to a vendor to run that for you in the cloud, essentially. And then there was a couple of other phrases. There was a CASB, there was DNS. I think we all understand DNS to be obviously like Google's DNS, Cloudflare's, public DNS services, Cisco's umbrellas, public services where we're already applying a security policy or filter on top of at least an essential public free service. But then in the case of all of these products as well, you can subscribe and naturally, apply your own extra policies through DNS. There was CASB and ZTNA as well. Does that sound like a majority of the things that we covered? Sounds like it.
Yeah, that does sound. Yeah, that sounds like the majority of things that we've covered. Of course, there are additional capabilities. You said, last time you had Scott, and you sort of talked to him about that Thousand Eyes component, where you're sort of getting an insight, right? Everyone's remote, and what does the performance look like for SaaS-based applications and things like that. So different vendors also offer the capability to be able to kind of have an insight of the performance of those SaaS-based applications. So that's also a component that sits within the SSE side of things, or if I say that component of it, you've got that option as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess in when you get into that side of the world and you start to apply security policy, depending on what you apply, right, there is the potential to break connectivity to something. So you do want to be able to monitor that experience as well. So I guess thinking about all of this, like I personally understand the purpose of DNS as sort of the first line of defense in all of this. I guess for our listeners who maybe don't quite understand what piece of security works where, why is DNS an important part of the security profile and SSE product?
Whenever I speak to my customers, generally I highly recommend, even if you feel like you're not ready to move to all the capabilities, DNS security, DNS filtering is highly recommended. And the reason behind that is when you look at that DNS layer security, it's basically at the domain layer, right? We are all accessing the internet. We're doing majority of our work in the internet. All our applications are now based on the internet. We're clicking on things and so on. And DNS layer security is pretty much your first layer of defense. You want to get access to any website, to any application, you have to resolve that domain. For you to resolve that domain, you need that DNS component. For when you've got that DNS component that's sort of resolving that domain for you, you now need that capability to be able to inspect that domain to make sure that it is not a malicious one. So to be able to protect the user, yes, you can click on it, but have the capability in place or the security in place to be able to stop before that connection is made, because that is a malicious domain and things like that. So to me, if anything, that DNS layer security is paramount for any business.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think when you come from a traditional mindset of blocking on IP, but so many things live on cloud services like Amazon. If you were to block the entire Amazon subnet, you would block access to probably so many applications on the internet these days. So it makes sense to block things one layer up at the DNS level. I appreciate that.
And not to mention that these cloud services typically have a habit of rotating their IP addresses for whatever reason. Maybe they've, gained more IP segments or subnets coming off the internet, or they've decided to change. I think recently Microsoft has done something of the same nature where they've updated some of their the IP addressing of the services. And I'd like to remind people that if you don't know what DNS is, it's basically the phone directory of the internet. So having a layer of security sitting at that level is actually a very smart idea.
Spot on, Fred.
I love it. A phone directory. Yeah, it's a very good way to put it. So I guess that then leads into the next part of, I guess, SSE and ZTNA, right? We have our traditional VPN. And if I remember what it was like to use that as an employee at my current employer, back in the day, if I had to access Salesforce, I had to click, I had to enable the VPN first, I had to wait for it to connect to do all of its things. And then I could finally access that solution. But nowadays, and you mentioned it as well, right? There's ZTNA, which is sort of an alternative way to connect to it. I guess, could you give us a rundown of what the different experience is between VPN and ZTNA for connecting to, say, like a cloud-based service?
Oh, that's a very good question. And I guess I'll start from where we've all started, right? Just the experience you've just given right now to sort of access things and the process you had to go through. And pretty much where users are today, if you compare to 5 years ago, maybe that was okay to do it. But now the way I like to say it is, because we're so remote, it's no more the office, right? It's no more that traditional perimeter that you've got, that everyone's connected to the office. The way I see it, the perimeter today is that identity, right? It's that user that you want to protect, who's moving across different areas, trying to access different applications. Now, this user is very important, or this identity is very important, because you want to make sure that whatever they're accessing or trying to access, they do it easily, for starters, right? If you make things harder for me, I will try and find ways to get around accessing that application. If I have to, connect to the VPN so my internet traffic can go through it and get inspected and all that stuff, and it's taking me 3-4 clicks, I might try and find a way not to connect to that VPN, right? Now, that's the aspect of, I guess, accessing things and making it seamless for the user. But there's also the aspect of where we've come from in terms of using VPN and then moving into this, I guess, more modern way to connect, such as zero trust capability. Now, it's very different for different organizations. You might have a VPN set up and it is a flat network, right? I VPN in and I have access to everything. Sometimes you might have VLANs set up or kind of do some segmentation, you sort of access everything. And that is an organization or an individual that's sort of taken the steps to make sure that it's not a flat network, that if Vlad connects, he can access everything, even though he's just, all he does is just maybe sells and things like that. When we look at zero trust, it is basically that. I don't trust anyone. So zero trust, I've got to make sure that I verify not only your identity, but your device, your location, maybe the behavior of the user as well before you access the applications. So we're moving from opening the network for everyone to kind of making it per application. Right? So have a way in such a way that if I'm setting up this application and you're coming through, it's a zero trust environment, I don't care if you're in the office or you're not in the office. If that's the pathway I'm taking, I'm going to verify your identity. I'm going to verify your device. I'm going to assume that you're going to breach my network, even though you are the employee. That is the assumption you take with something like zero trust. Assume breach even though it's not there, to make sure that you're going through the different steps. So when I look if I look at both of them, I don't know if VPN is going to go anywhere. There are some instances where you've got applications that potentially still need the VPN because of the protocols that we're still using with VPN. But where we're moving forward to having that zero trust capability, and what vendors are doing, I'll give an example for Cisco, is we're ensuring that users have, not only secure, but a seamless access to the applications. Having zero trust means maybe I can have Vlad click less, but his device is secure. He's the identity that's sort of accessing that applications, etc.
That makes sense. So what we're saying is that I guess ZTNA is traditionally then it's a new way of connecting to more sort of HTTP web-based assets and applications versus sort of traditional, where I might be on port 5253 or whatever for some random application, right? We are handling connectivity to applications that are now on sort of, new ways of doing things, primarily based on the web, which makes sense.
Yeah.
I love the way Umu described the ZTNA concept earlier, where she was saying, the solution or the technology doesn't trust you inherently. You may be the employee, you have the rights to access it, but I will have to verify anyway, because we assume you may not attack, but we're going to be preparing for the possibility that you might be compromised. In my world, or at least in my head, that's saying, yes, you have the access. I'm supposed to trust you, but I cannot trust you for your own safety because you might be an idiot.
Yeah, and we're looking at it from zero trust. Just for our audience and listeners, you're thinking of zero trust or zero trust network access as more of an architecture, right? So it's not really a product. It's more of at an architecture side of things, and more of a platform. And then applying that to how your users are going to access those applications securely and seamlessly. Vlad, I just want to touch on something you mentioned in terms of, I guess, web-based and things like that. When you look at that zero trust capability, and different vendors have different ways of doing it, the way I would explain it is if you're offering that zero trust capability, then you're sort of looking at installing a module, running a module on your endpoint, but it doesn't stop you at just web-based application, right? So you're looking at, TCP, UDP protocols, etc., to be able to access those applications. So you're not limited to just web-based. It can support TCP and UDP protocols, not just HTTP.
Fantastic. I love and appreciate the correction. So thank you very much for that. Brilliant. Fred, jump in, my friend.
Here's the $1 million question then. We've already been talking about VPN if it makes sense, ZTNA if it makes sense. How do, how do companies, how do organizations recognize where to go, which way to go? I mean, for some things, for someone like me who might not be a traditional security person or an applications person for that matter, how do I know if I still need my VPN infrastructure? And VPN sucks, by the way. I hate it, having that additional 3-4 clicks just to connect to a network securely. I understand the intention behind securing that connection, but the user experience just is a bit, it's not frictionless. Let's just put it that way. And that kind of gave people the idea that security and user experience don't always go hand in hand. And I know for a fact that ZTNA is meant to address that, to make that whole thing more seamless, smooth people into being aware of security as well as user experience. But when does, if explain it to a layman or a common user, when do they expect something to be sitting behind a VPN connection or a ZTNA connection, if I'm using that term correctly?
I'd say it would really depend, and I know depend is not usually a good answer, but we've got to look at the application. There are some instances where maybe you might need to make, I know you said layman's language, but I'll try my best to see if I can put it that way. But there are some instances where I might have to do server, like the server is the one that's initiating that call, right? You may look at, I don't think anyone does VoIP via VPN, but you wouldn't want something like VoIP to go through that zero trust capability. So to be transparent, I think it would just be looking at the applications that you've got. Sometimes you might have a really legacy application that sort of requires a server to kind of make that initiation and things like that. In that instance, then you've got the VPN to kind of back you up at that point. But I would say majority of applications that sort of using TCP and UDP should be working well with a zero trust connection method or zero trust architecture when you look at that SASE framework. The other thing I would add on to it is when you're sort of looking at that SASE capability or sort of working with a vendor, if you look at it from an SSE, from a SASE option, look at it in terms of, if I can't do zero trust, then do I go out there and try and get a VPN vendor to sort of work with what I've got? Or can I sort of have one solution that gives me the flexibility and the option to sort of be able to do both, right? So if something doesn't work using this architecture, then I can use this other architecture to sort of get by, I guess.
Yep, that makes sense. Now I know we're rolling slowly towards what we would typically get to the end of our episode and trying to keep things to half an hour, but this conversation is just so fascinating. I feel like there's still so much more to unpack in all of this. I guess one thing we really want to cover and what we like to do when we get close to the end of a show for Packet Party is to always ask the question, why should we care about whatever the topic of today is? In terms of what we've been discussing, I feel like we kind of understand what that care about is already in terms of, the ability to make connectivity easier, more securely, and I guess apply policy at the endpoint. Is there a common use case or something that you see a lot of customers struggling with at the moment where like that's become a topic of conversation for you and a reason for them to implement SASE or SSE? Things, for example, like the rise of AI tooling that's available publicly on the internet or something. Is there a particular storyline that you hear a lot from customers at the moment around why they need SASE?
Yeah, so one is basically you still have organizations and customers still hosting applications, right? It could be in a private data center, or it could be in the cloud and things like that. Those are the options that are available. But when you look at a traditional VPN to start with, we've always had the hardware device itself as a VPN head-end or the concentrator. So where we're seeing a lot of people kind of moving towards when I look at just accessing those applications that are being hosted is kind of moving to a VPN as a service because one, businesses are growing as well, right? And majority of the time, what you would hear is, now I've gone from 50 to 100 users, and I've got 100 users trying to VPN into the network, but my device can't. If I have to scale, I just have to buy another device. I have to get a bigger box that will be able to support my users. So what I'm hearing and where I guess customers are moving towards is, well, everything is SaaS-based now, or someone's offering a service for me that they're responsible of. So where the move is going to basically is, instead of me buying bigger, powerful devices to support my users remotely, how about I outsource this service? How about I give this to a vendor to sort of scale for me, right? So now I really don't care if I have 1,000 users joining next week. All I want to make sure is the service is being outsourced and I'm going to have my users supported because we can scale at large. So that's one aspect when you still have resources on premises or you're sort of hosting yourself. The other aspect as well is removing that on-premise footprint, right? And potentially moving to the cloud. You've got SaaS-based solutions and things like that. Where customers are struggling today is the plethora of SaaS-based applications that are being used. On one hand, you have an idea of the licenses and the applications that you pay for because you're paying for them. So you've got an inventory of the applications that are being used, and in some shape or form, you would be able to enforce some policies and so have some policies enforced on those applications. What you don't know is what are these other SaaS-based applications that Vlad thinks is better to use than what the business is giving him. And that is something that businesses have no insight to, right? I'm supposed to use this particular cloud storage solution for the business, but I'm used to another solution. And what's stopping me from using that? And when that happens, then you're in this predicament whereby a user who maybe has no awareness could knowingly or unknowingly share information out of the business. So that is a lot of, I hear a lot from customers basically is we've got no visibility on the SaaS-based applications that are being used today. And so having a SASE capability on SSE solution then gives you that visibility of what else is being used. And we all know, can't see what you can't protect, but now that you can see it, you can enforce those policies and create awareness as well.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I think we hear a lot of customers talk about the fact that, people will buy their own like private instance to ChatGPT. They'll upload some sort of, work-related file to it, hoping to do some sort of like analysis over it for them, even though it's actually not a company-approved tool yet. Or, you hear there was a story of Samsung where that actually happened. An employee using ChatGPT unknowingly leaking huge amounts of IP out of the company, or people even something as simple as like signing up for like Snowflake databases. Apparently, people were doing that to trial the product, uploading company information into these databases. These weren't MFA protected, and then when the service was hacked, there was a lot of these leftover trial databases with all of this data in it, and suddenly all of that was exposed, right? So like you say, I guess why people should care about SASE and SSE is very much around visibility. What are people actually doing? Where's the shadow IT live in my environment? Fascinating concept.
Yeah, and there's the concept of data loss prevention too. I don't know if that falls into the AI domain, but I know for a fact that some companies are starting to work on AI security. Probably something that we can cover in a future topic, and we'd love to have you back here, Umu. But I don't know if it already falls into SSE or SASE, where things like intellectual property and data loss prevention is kind of something that will extend into the AI side of things.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Just to add to that visibility, there's also a notion of data loss prevention as well, right? There is compliance, and businesses have to comply to holding those PII informations of their customers. So DLP, data loss prevention is part of SASE. And yes, part of it as well is that AI side of things, and having some sort of a guardrail basically for when users are sort of accessing those tools that you may or may not have visibility on or knowledge on as well. But yeah, something can be covered at a later stage.
All right. Well, to wrap up this episode, thank you again, Umu, for giving us your insight on SASE versus SSE, and most importantly, why our listeners should really care about the implementation of such a framework into their environment. We will definitely keep it under wraps to plan another episode talking about AI, IP, and DLP. Sound good, Fred?
Absolutely. Did I ever tell you? I remember telling you this, Vlad, but every time I come out of a conversation with Umu, I always feel that much smarter. And that's exactly what's happening today.
Yeah. I definitely feel a lot better in terms of now talking to my own customers about the topic. So appreciate the time today, Umu, and I appreciate all of our listeners listening us today. Fred, Umu, any final comments from the both of you?
No, that's good. Umu, thank you very much for the time. And if, like Vlad said earlier, one of the things that we kind of use to round out that conversation, and I know we've already covered that in the past half hour, but, we're not going to ask you why people should care about hybrid working. I think we've highlighted the benefits of it enough. But in a summary of maybe a few words, 2 sentences, what do you think people should care about SASE or SSE or security in general?
Security in general, I would say with hybrid work, the shift has changed, right? We don't have that control anymore of everyone's coming into the office, they're plugging in their computers to the network and things like that. I'm still on the side of identity is the new perimeter. You've got to follow your user. And having hybrid work in place means we're following that user. Having an SSE, a SASE solution, gives you the capability to follow that user, whether they're in the office or whether they're at a cafe or an airport. You as a business at least have a bit of a confidence that that device is protected, that user is protected, because that is the new perimeter. That's the one that's carrying everything. So that would be my final say there. But thanks for having me. This was great.
That was very well said. Take it away, Vlad.
Awesome. Thank you to our listeners again. Keep your ears out for a new episode coming the following week, where we're going to dive into Umu's career journey, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about herself, just like how we did with Scott. Thanks again for listening.